by people who are most impacted. So you don't speak on their experiences if you're part of a centered identity, but you always amplify their voices, and you're always there to kind of to be their fallback person, essentially, because oftentimes, and it is sad, but your voice will be more heard and more appreciated than those in that marginalized group. And when you mess up, learn from it, commit to learning, growing, and adapting. Don't let messing up or being miseducated on something or saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing discouraging you, because it's all part of the learning process, especially if you're part of a centered identity. And we just have this quote on the bottom here: we have to be deeply committed to messing up. So that's pretty much it. If you guys have any comments or questions on that, you can put in the chat or unmute yourself. Anything to add on? If not, I think we can go into our 5-minute break, Anika.
Yeah, I see a lot of really great reflections and insights in the chat. I would love to honor all of them because they're all quite diverse. But you know, that's gonna take another like an hour. So I would definitely encourage y'all to like go through the chat if you have some time in your break. But yeah, for now, 5-minute break. We'll be back at 4:08 Eastern time. And so while you're taking your break, please make sure to come back with a piece of paper and a writing utensil for our next portion. And I will go ahead and put on some music so that if you're hanging around, you can also enjoy.
These are really great comments if you guys want to take a second to look through them.
Please definitely look through the chat. It is actually mind-blowing. So. All right, folks, 5-minute break is up. So we're gonna get started without further ado, since we have a lot to get through. So start my video. I'm gonna apologize for folks that are gonna watch the recording. We were unable to record the first half, but the slides should be enough for y'all to kind of go through the content and use that in your activism. And we'll also provide some additional resources in our Slack channel, which we'll talk about later. So, so I'm gonna go right into how to figure out what is your activism origin story, or story of self, which is how we talk about it in this framework called public narrative. So a quick background into what public narrative is about. This is a storytelling and leadership practice that was developed by a community organizer, really famous community organizer named Marshall Gans. I had the pleasure of being in his class and learning this transformative, life-changing storytelling process. And I'm really excited to share it with you all. So I'm not gonna go too much into what the public narrative framework is, but there are basically 3 components to it, and we're gonna start with the first component, which is the story of self. And so as we talk about telling stories, one thing that I wanna uplift is the storytelling, what is a storytelling structure, right? I think a lot of folks in school, I remember I learned in school that story has a beginning, middle, and end. I think there's a better way of talking about what a storytelling structure is, and that's through this public narrative framework. So every good story has a challenge that the protagonists face, a choice that the protagonist has to make in order to kind of really come to terms with this challenge. And then that leads to some sort of outcome, right? So if I were to tell you, you know, I woke up this morning and I skipped breakfast because I had to work on this thing, and then I submitted the thing, like this application that I was working on. Now I'm here talking to you, right? Like it's not a really good story. I think a more interesting story would be, which is actually what happened to me, is I was working on this application down to the line. Okay, I had like 5 minutes left to turn it in, and I submitted it, and then it said I have to, you know, there were errors and I couldn't see where the errors were, and I was freaking out. That's a more exciting story, right? Because there's a little bit of action in there, right? There's a little bit of challenge, there's a little conflict, because in our lives are actually ridden with conflicts every day, right? And so what we learn from stories is how to overcome those conflicts. So I'm gonna kind of, typically would love this to be a much more interactive exercise, but because we have to pack in a lot of things, I'm just gonna go ahead and dive right into a exercise with maybe a brave volunteer who is really excited to explore their activism's origin story today. So can I get someone to hop off of their mic and do a fun, hopefully fun exercise with me?
I can, if no one else.
Who is that? Is that Delina?
Yeah.
Hi, Delina. I'm so glad you volunteered for this. So let's start off with a question. What calls you to leadership?
What pulled me?
Yeah. Why are you, yeah, why are you doing this? Why are you doing steps?
Because I feel like there's a lot of not equal opportunities around. So I feel like we need to, because like no one's really doing it in my area.
All right, no one's doing it in the area. I also asked you to put your camera on so I could see you.
Oh, okay.
Easier. So you're saying that no one in your area, you said no one in your area is doing advocacy.
Not really.
Okay.
Like,
well, first of all, let's backtrack. Why is advocacy necessary? You mentioned like, there are inequities. Where did you first see inequity in your life?
and I haven't really seen it. I've seen it in other people's lives. Not really. I've
When's
like
the first time you saw it in other people's lives?
the first time I've seen. It's not okay. So it's conversation. I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain it. So like conversational, because like from my school, when I see from my school, and okay. So the first time I really seen it was like, so I went to like this county-wide meeting for students, and I walked into, I forgot what school, but I walked into school and I saw around, and it had so much going for it, and like so many activities around, I feel like so much opportunity in the school, and I'm like,
What school did you go to?
some up county school. It was like, I think it was like RM, I don't know.
Okay, so you saw a lot of things, and then your school didn't have that.
No, I was like, I feel like the word that to describe was like alive, if that makes sense. Like it was so much going on.
It's alive.
And so much like so much activism, and like I seen other people from different schools up there that was going like doing so much activism, and I'm like,
why did you want that for your school?
because I feel like we're majority minority school, so I was like, oh, let me turn on my camera actually.
So you made a connection. You were like, what I'm hearing you saying is that you saw all this thing happen, and you were like, we're a minority majority school, and we don't have these resources because we're minority majority. Is that the conclusion that you made?
Yes.
So my question is, how did you know this? When was the first time you realized that racial minorities don't get the same resources as white folks, as upper class folks?
I go to Paint Branch High School.
Yeah.
I see the question. Where did I seen it?
Yeah. What, like, the whole point of the storytelling practice is to really ground people in specific experiences, right? So we have all of these new accounts, right? Like Black at MoCo, Queer at MoCo, MoCo Me Too, right? All of that's rooted in storytelling and really taking people into a specific moment so that people understand these injustices. So can you tell me a story of the first time you saw this injustice of like Black and brown students not getting the resources that they need to flourish?
I don't think it's like really seeing. I feel like I have not had that moment of it seeing it because I feel like I've just been around. But it's like a conversation.
Have you experienced like racism or anything in your life?
I have not.
You have not.
Yes.
But you know it's real. So can you?
I know it's real because I've seen it on TV. I've seen it, especially through this Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's going on with George Floyd. I've seen it on TV and everywhere.
So
I know
experience. So I'm going to interrupt you because I want to get to the point too. Like if you've never experienced this in your life, then why do you care? Because there are a lot of people who are like, they've never experienced injustice. They don't care. They just think about themselves, right? So why do you care?
Because, okay, I feel like the true movement is, so my parents are, I'm Eritrean American. There's a lot of injustice that happens there.
Okay.
And I see a lot of injustice that happens there.
What was
And
the first time you saw injustice in Eritrea?
it was the first time?
Yeah.
I'm not really, I like,
Have you been?
I have,
Okay, how old were you when you went?
like, going into 4th grade, but
Okay, so you landed in Eritrea. I forgot the name of the capital. Is that where you were in the capital?
Asmara, yeah. But
Yeah.
I've been around.
And what was your impression when you landed?
I feel like beautiful place, but now thinking back of it, a beautiful place, but a lot of like improvement could happen. If that makes sense. And lots of
And
improvement.
why does your mind go to there? Like wow, like you were, okay, so you saw a beautiful place, a lot of improvement can happen. And so, and you developed this, I feel like I get a better sense of why you care, right? So why did you decide to do something about it? Like, did your parents teach you?
No, that's the thing. Cause it's weird because politics is not really talked about because politics.
So who do you think like influenced you to think this way?
I think because the different sides, because there's 2 different sides, and I feel like everyone needs to come together. I feel like
Who taught you? Like, where did you learn that?
there's like conversation between, because of course there's conversation between parents and siblings, because my brother's older than me and my dad, they always have conversation about it, but they don't.
Your parents have a conversation about it. They care about it.
Yes, but they don't do furthermore, if that makes sense. Okay. Conversation, yes, but like not furthermore, if that makes sense. Because the people in my community have conversation, but they don't do.
And then, so you see a lot of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired of talking. Let's do something about it. Is that getting to it? And yes. So where do you think you got that from? Like this action orientation? Where did you see that? Who taught you that?
I feel like it was like instilled is like to just like have conversation, to like, I've been doing this, like have conversation, to ask questions, to go after it, to do something about stuff. If like, I really want
at school, like, is there someone in your community, like the one person who's like wanting to act? Do you see any examples of that in your community?
I've had teachers encourage. I had a teacher, teacher this year, because this year was when I made the transition to actually, I had a realization. I had a teacher encouraging, like talking, like seeing in me what I can do.
Okay, all right. So now I feel like we're finally getting to a place. If we had some more time, I would really like ask you about your teacher, because I feel like your teacher is a critical person in this journey for you. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to ask folks, you know, kind of what was I doing with Delina? What did you notice I was doing? What was coming up for y'all as we were going through that process? Other than the fact that I'm glad I'm not the person in the hot seat.
That was hard.
How did you feel, Delina? Like, do you feel like you have a better sense of your why?
Yes, and I've been thinking about it a lot, because I've been writing a lot of stuff. I've been trying to, because of especially college stuff, like thinking about the identity part and like thinking about where I wanted to go. So I've been thinking about it a lot, but then I haven't really talked about it.
So Lukabet shared in the chat, as an Ethiopian American, she also sees kind of parallels between her experience and your experience. Lukabet, do you want to talk a little bit more about kind of what you saw me doing with Delina and you know, kind of what that experience was like for you?
Yeah.
Your activism story.
Yeah, like that's always been like kind of a hard question for me to answer, because like I don't know where to pinpoint like where I really like just wanted to like be in activism. But I guess in my community there's a lot of talk, and like, yeah, like there are like outright problems that could be fixed, but like nobody's doing anything about it, or like it's just not, like people are not like advocating as they do in the United States. And I know like there are issues in the United States, but just being in such a like a progressive, and like where nearly everyone, at least like in my friend group, nearly everyone is like kind of participating in some sort of activism. Like I was really encouraged to like do that. And like maybe it's because like I know that I can like join an organization and like create some sort of change. And that's why like I joined STEPS. But like I think like seeing like the problems like in my country and like in my community, and feeling like, oh, like there isn't really much I can do about it. It's like such like a big scale. It's like I'm gonna start here, and maybe like someday that like I can work like towards like, you know, helping my community and like in like that scale.
Can I also add something real quick?
Real quick though.
I just want to say, like, I don't really consider myself an activist, but I feel like I'm getting there, if that makes sense. That's all.
That's okay. Like and if you all like, if that resonates with other folks that you don't feel like you're an activist yet, but you're getting there, then that's totally fine, right? Like this is all about understanding kind of, you know, where that drive is coming from, because if you understand that drive, you can influence other people. So I'm gonna go ahead and to give you a sense of how to think about your activism origin story, I'm gonna share my story so that it could potentially help you guys think about how to craft your story. And as you're listening to my story, really in the chat, if folks can pinpoint, and Lily, can you put the question in the chat? What is the challenge I talk about? What is like the central challenge in my story? What is the choice that I make? And what is the outcome? So folks can try to answer that in the question. And also what resonates with you as you're listening to my story. That would also be great. All right, so I'm gonna time myself. So I remember the first time I landed in Dhaka, Bangladesh, which was the where I was born. And where I left when I was 2 years old with my family to come to the United States. The first thing that assaulted my senses was the smell of pollution. And I remember coming out of the airport and just seeing like bodies stacked on top of each other as I was going into my taxi cab, a bunch of people putting their hands through the grates of the gate, asking for money, seeing all these like really wealthy people coming. And even though my family is not wealthy, like the fact that we were able to fly shows that we have these means, right, that other people don't have. And I remember going to my grandmother's house, seeing poverty on the street, abject poverty, high-rise luxury apartments neighboring shanty towns, and going into my grandmother's house and seeing that she had a maid. I had no idea she had a maid. She was 14, 6 years older than me, and she became my friend. And I remember one day seeing her sitting on the floor, and I asked my grandmother, why is she sitting on the floor? And my grandmother says, that's where she eats. And I knew in that moment, if I didn't sit on that floor with her, because I knew there was no way in hell she was going to be allowed to sit at the table, that I would be abandoning my friend. And as someone who has been abandoned by people before in my eight-year-old life, I knew that was the worst thing that I could be committing, worst crime I could be committing to a friend. So I sat there with her that day. And you should have seen the day that I left for the United States, the tears we shed. And even though I haven't seen my friend Vanessa since that moment, that was really the impetus for me to care about social justice, to build solidarity with different people, and to fight for a better world. So that's my story. So what, I'm gonna go in the chat, I'm nervous. So yeah, what, does anyone want to talk about, get off the mic, talk about the challenge, choice, and outcome in my story? And if folks want to in the chat also talk about what resonated with them. And what you were curious about. Was there something in my story that didn't click with you about why I care about this thing? Someone want to hop off of mute? I'm going to call on someone if I don't get anyone.
I can go.
Go ahead.
So I think the biggest challenge was having to choose between sitting on the ground with your friend or abandoning her, and that was also your choice to sit with her, and then the outcome was that you were showing you stood with her sat with her, literally. And yeah, the outcome is you also had a deep sense of what you wanted to sort of fight for or who you wanted to be. and you connected that with your past of feeling maybe lonely or abandoned in life, which was really how it resonated. So that's amazing.
Thank you so much. What was there a moment in my story that particularly stood out to you?
I think just the way that you really empathized with your friend, despite maybe adults telling you something else, or just being at that age very aware, was really incredible to hear about.
And like hearing my story, was that like a story of someone who like came out of the womb being an activist? Like, do you feel like that was like a story that could be shared by anyone?
Personally, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone can say that they came out of the womb being an activist.
We all have those moments in our lives, right? And it's a matter of really figuring out what those key moments are and taking people to that moment, right? Thank you so much, Annalise. And I don't know if anyone else wants to share anything, but in the meantime, we can spend if folks still want to share stuff in the chat, that's cool. We have about 5 minutes for you to kind of think about what your challenge, choice, outcome moment was. And it doesn't have to be when you were 8 years old, right? Everyone has a different moment. My moment was the moment where I chose to sat on the ground with my friend, and that cascaded a series of events, because that was the first time I realized about injustice. And that cascaded a series of events that made me care about social justice. So what is that one moment that cascaded a series of events for you? That's what you're gonna figure out right now. So I'm gonna put 5 minutes on the clock, and then we'll go from there. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat so we can keep this a quiet space for everyone. Okay, so let's wrap up with the brainstorming. If you feel like you still haven't gotten everything figured out, that's totally fine. One thing that I want to emphasize about the practice of finding your story of self and the general public narrative practice is that this is something that you have to do over and over and over again, and you'll never achieve perfection. And that's the beauty of it, right? And so so really think about it. Marshall Gans talks about learning this process as riding a bike, right? Like, did y'all learn how to ride a bike, like studying bike riding 101, and you've got on a bike and didn't fall, right? No, you fell, you scraped your knee, you got back up and you did it again, right? So we're not expecting perfection here. So that's one thing to think about as what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go into breakout rooms real soon. And so I'm gonna give you guys some instructions on how to manage these breakout rooms. They're not gonna be facilitated, but I'm gonna give you cues on what to do. And also I wanted to emphasize some things in the chat I saw here. So Alex asked if, was there a bridge connecting the why to the how? There's always that bridge, right? But let's focus on the why, right? We really want to understand what was that first moment in your life that you were called to action, that made you care about social injustices, right? So Molly's saying she became an activist with the, now, which is awesome, right? Like with the murder of George Floyd and seeing the injustice of that. Molly, my question to you as you're gonna share your story in your group is to answer the question of why though? Why now, right? What made you take that leap? So really focusing on the moment and why, right? So I talked about like my moment for me was seeing my friend on the ground. She was my friend, right? Like that was first and foremost our relationship. It would have been cruel of me as someone who experienced abandonment to abandon her in that moment. So that was my why, right? What's your why? That's something to figure out. And then, so in terms of coaching, so this is the way this is gonna go. You're gonna be in groups of 2 to 3. Everyone's gonna get 2 minutes to share their story. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna broadcast that. So you'll see that. So you don't have to worry about timing yourself, right? I'll do that work. And then you're gonna have 3 minutes for the 1 or 2 other people in the group to ask you questions to really get at like the details, to really bring to light like, why you do what you do, right? Like what calls you to action. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that coaching process in a second. And then we're going to switch. So 2 minutes for telling the story for the next person, 3 minutes for coaching. And then for the final person, 2 minutes and 3 minutes. There are going to be some groups of 2. The extra 5 minutes is for you to do as you please. And I'd also like at the end, towards the end, if you guys can figure out, like ask maybe if there's someone that might be willing to share, someone you thought their story was really cool, we'd love to hear that in the big group. So so think about that as if you're willing to share as we're gonna go into the next process. So after someone shares their story, think about these things as you're coaching them to have a kind of a more evocative story, right? That really touches on the emotional aspect, right? So things that we really like to see in story of self is images, right? Like really taking you there, really making you feel like you're in the movie of that person's life, right? These are the moments that evoke emotion, right? Asking people how they felt, if they're not talking about that, is something great to add color. And I'm gonna put this in the slide so that in the deck so that you guys have it, right? So I'm gonna actually put it in right now. It's editable right now. If you guys can just not edit things and change things, that'll be really great. But you'll have this to work off of when you're in breakout rooms. The other thing to try to look out for in each of your stories, right? Like, is there a challenge? Is there a clear challenge? Is there a clear choice that someone made? Is there an outcome that happened, right? So you might see someone has a challenge and a choice, but you're not really sure, you know, how that connected to the activism. If you see that missing, ask about it, right? And then the way that we coach is we focus on asking questions rather than telling them like, I like this. You can say like, this resonated with me. This is something I'm curious about that I'm still unclear about in terms of your story. So ask questions rather than saying like, yeah, you need to include something about X, Y, and Z. That's not the way to do the coaching. Don't be afraid to interrupt if you feel like they're not getting to the point, because you only have 3 minutes to give them really good feedback. So you know, use that, right? And then also ask them about their origin point. If someone's story starts off as a challenge in terms of like phone banking for a candidate, for example, well, the question there for me is like, before we go into the story, why are you even phone banking? What made you get to phone banking in the first place, right? You want to understand exactly why a person is doing the activism that they're doing. Is that clear? Can I get like a thumbs up if people like feel like they're, or if thumbs in the middle, thumbs down. All right, I see a lot of thumbs up, so I'm gonna go ahead and continue with putting y'all into breakout rooms. But before I do that, do we have any last questions? Okay, so Amari does have a question, so why don't you ask a question?
Okay, so for the story, right? Because like, I think the story I'm gonna talk about is like the origin of why, like what inspired me to get into activism. That's like our origin story, right? Not necessarily like how we ended up where we are today, but not necessarily like.
It's that one moment in your life where you felt like, one thing I forgot to mention is that these choices that we make are undergirded by values. So if I had more time, I'd ask you what the value in my story was, but I would say the value in my story was like, you know, solidarity, community, right? Like this idea of, a friendship, right? That was the value in my story. That's what motivated me to stand up to injustice. And so think about like, when, you know, either as a child or now you all are in the formative years of your life, right? What is a value that you learned? And what was the first time that's related to social justice? And what was the first time you felt like that value is being infringed upon? What was the choice then?
Oh, okay. That
makes
makes
sense?
sense. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have any other questions before we go in? And again, perfection is not the key here, right? It's just getting on the bike, learning how to ride the bike. And we have, you know, Lulit here. We have a couple of other seasoned older activists that are also joining us in this exercise. So this is something for anyone of all age to enjoy. So
I actually have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so like personally, this doesn't apply to me, but like, what would you say should like people that don't really like know what their why is now, like what should they how should they, you know,
take a stab at it, and hopefully the other people in your group can ask you the questions to help you figure that out.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks for asking that question. It's a great question. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put y'all into groups, and you should get an invitation to join. and I'll give you the cues.